Hello, welcome to Back to Basics. Today we're talking about the arms and hands, maybe the most complicated part of the golf swing. If you've been following the course, what I'm trying to do is kind of separate different parts of the swings without kind of getting down into detail about what every joint is actually doing during a golf swing. This is something which gets more difficult when we actually start talking about what the arms and hands should be doing in a golf swing. I have a very kind of simple model, which is basically a case of lifting the arms as you start the backswing. So as your shoulder rotation starts, as you start to go into the side bend, almost immediately lifting your arms, and that's both arms actively lifting the golf club. Now, it's difficult for you to actually get a kind of picture of where the arms should be going, but if you were to just simply have a feeling of lifting it up in front of the middle of your chest, then you're not going to be far wrong with that. So you can see from the side camera that as I rotate, I lift the club up, and this actually helps me to take the club back away on what we call plane, which basically stops the golf club coming too far on the inside. But also I don't want to be lifting the arms before I start rotating, which would take the arms and the club above the plane. Obviously, as I'm actually lifting the golf club, I am resisting the weight of the club trying to pull the head down towards the ground. And a lot of golfers who especially are trying to hold the golf club really loosely, not apply too much pressure to the grip, will actually often find that as they start the backswing, that their wrists are coming up, the club head is going down, and that will actually cause the club sometimes to kind of go under the plane line and get too far behind them. So you've got to be applying a certain amount of pressure to the grip end vertically down in order to keep the club in its original plane at the beginning of your backswing. And this is very important if you want to kind of keep the golf club on plane in the swing. This is one of the reasons we were talking in the beginners section kind of how when you grip the golf club, you take it in the left hand, you want to have this feeling of the ball of your heel of your hand on top of the club. That will stop the club from kind of drooping if you're holding it strongly enough in your lead hand. As you take the club back further, your wrists are going to start hinging. And the way that your wrists hinge is something which is very, very important, but is different for different golfers. Now, you will see an awful lot of golfers on the tour. Dustin Johnson is probably the best example of this, who are actually hinging the lead wrist back, going into a lot of what they call flexion at the back of the golf swing, which is obviously going to have an influence on the plane line, as the angle of the shaft towards the ground, but even more importantly, it's going to have an influence on the club face and where the club face is pointing. So at some stage in the downswing, they're going to have to release that flexion, come back out of it, at least reduce it dramatically in order to get the golf club square onto the golf ball. Most of this type of player are being very aggressive in their rotation. They have a lot of mobility, and at impact, their hips and shoulders are open to the target more than maybe your classic player. The classic wrist hinge, which I have in my PDF, and which I would basically say unless you are an exceptional player or exceptionally mobile, this is probably the easier way of doing it. If you struggle with hip rotation, if you struggle with shoulder rotation, then this is most certainly the better way of doing it, and just keeping the wrist pretty neutral, which means that it's only going to start to even bow backwards a little bit at the top of the swing as your trail elbow bends and your trail wrist hinges backwards. So this is basically the classic way of taking the club away, is starting by turning the shoulders, lifting the arms actively, hinging the trail elbow and trail wrist back, and allowing them to influence the lead wrist. The hinging of the trail elbow will also pull the club back and your lead arm across your chest. So although you've been lifting the club up almost in front of your chest to start off with, as your trail arm hinges, it pulls it back, and at the top of the swing you should have the feeling of the lead arm almost kind of running parallel to the original shaft plane, and you should have that kind of feeling of it being pulled back across your chest under your chin. And this means that at the top of the swing as well, that your trail hand is almost an extension of your trail shoulder. This is a position we call the waiter. Yeah, so it just basically to give you kind of a visual image of what it is your arms are doing in the backswing. When we change direction, and we're trying to do this before the arms actually stop moving up, then there's obviously going to be a play in the wrist, which is again going to usually cause the lead wrist to go into even more flexion. And this is actually something that we want to do and allow to happen. If that's not happening, it's because you are actually getting to the top of your swing, and before you start the rotation back, you are starting down with your arms and with your hands, whether it be extending the trail arm and wrist, or actively pulling down on the club, which will again change the wrist angle in your lead hand. So you want to have a feeling almost of your hands being pretty passive at the top, the wrist joints being pretty loose, so that as you change direction, you get this kind of flattening of the club. I've talked about it before. As your shoulders are rotating, you want actually the movement of your lead arm forward out towards the front camera here to actually cause the weight of the club to pull the club backwards, and this gives you this flattening and keeps this kind of slight bowing in the wrist. Then it's this rotation, or this hard rotation of the body towards the target, which is keeping pressure on the club, keeping inertia on the golf club, and keeping the lead wrist bent back slightly. As you come then into impact, you're going to have this lead wrist in relative to where it was at the beginning, actually bent slightly back away from the target. Again, this kind of bowing is what we call flexion. So that's more or less what should be happening in the golf swing. Again, I want to go into a little bit more detail of that in the future. I've been working with a wonderful little device called Hack Motion, which will actually measure the change in the wrist angles, and in coming videos we're going to go into a little bit more detail about that. So I'll leave a link below if you want to kind of look up a little bit about Hack Motion. You know that it's coming, but what we're doing today is trying to give you a very kind of global, simple version of how your arms and hands and wrists should be working in the swing. So altogether, really, we're kind of turning the shoulders and lifting the arms almost simultaneously. As we go back, they are starting to hinge the trail elbow almost immediately, and at the same time the trail wrist, allowing the lead wrist to go from the slight cupped position to actually leaning back or bending back a little bit towards the body and towards the shaft plane. And before you get to the top, you're changing direction, going into this transition with your body and allowing the club to flatten, which again will have the feeling of allowing this lead wrist to be pulled backwards. Turning hard around towards the target should keep inertia on the golf club, and as your body then starts to slow down, the arms will be released forward, and your trail arm can actually actively extend. You don't want the trail arm to be completely extended until after impact. It's a bit like throwing a stone on the water to get it to skip. You're not going to have the trail arm straighten here at the ball. You're going to straighten it through the ball, so it's almost a feeling of kind of swinging a yard through the ball before the trail arm becomes extended. At that stage, the club will overtake, the bowing of your lead wrist will disappear and go back into more of a cupping feeling. Your lead arm will start to fold and the club will pull you up into this extension, into this end position that we know from all the pictures that we've seen in the golf magazines. How are you going to practice this? Well, obviously this is something you ought to be doing daily as well, and if you can't get to a driving range, it would be good for you to have a practice, a drill that you can do at home. So I like my students to just place their lead wrist on top of their trail wrist, make the rotation and lift the arms up in front of the body, and then fold the trail arm back and the trail hand, which you'll see as the trail hand hinges back, it's kind of pressing the lead hand back with it. Then as we change direction, have the feeling of holding the arms onto the body up there. This is not what will happen actually in the swing. I'll talk about this in another video. But as you kind of rotate back into the feeling of the arms staying behind you and then releasing them out through the ball when your hip rotation is finished. That means that although your hips stop, your shoulders will not stop. They will slow down slightly, which allows your arms to overtake and come through. If you can get them just doing this simple drill on a regular basis, then what it will do, apart from anything else, it will help you to synchronize the arm swing with the body, starting almost simultaneously with your shoulder and hip rotation in the backswing, pulling the lead arm across the chest at the top of the backswing, dropping the arms or feeling that they're basically staying passive as you rotate back into impact, and then releasing the arms to extend, become fully extended after impact, around about a yard after impact, not quite at chest height, and then coming up and letting the trail or the lead arm fold. You see I've got this almost like a weighted position on the other side. All of these drills I've been showing you in this Back to Basics series are all about kind of trying to give your body a feeling for the movement that it has. Obviously the feeling is going to be difficult when you have a weight in your hand, in this case the golf club. So when I'm swinging the golf club, there's going to be a different kind of feeling than I'm going to have if I'm not swinging a golf club. But I'm still looking for these kind of basic feelings, the arms lifting, dropping, the body turning and pulling the club and the arms around. As I said in the coming videos, we're going to go into the arm system and hand system in a little bit more depth and show you the variations that you have there. But if you're just looking for a basic kind of how do I use my arms and hands in a golf swing, that's it. As ever, if you like the video, please hit the like button. It really does help the channel. If you haven't subscribed to us yet, please do so. A big thank you as ever to all of my patrons. If you would like to become a patron for the site, I'll leave a link below. We'll be back very shortly, and don't forget Hack Motion. Look it up on the internet. We'll be back with more about that very shortly. Bye-bye.